Let's take up Wi-Fi standards. Now we have looked at these a little bit in the past, so you're familiar with these to some degree, but I want to look at them again now, having looked at some of those standards. Now that we've looked at what FHSS is, and DSSS, and OFDM, and QAM, and MIMO, and MUMIMO, all of that we have under our belts now, and so we can understand these just a little bit better. First of all, let's say that the IEEE has always labeled these things by working group. In other words, they had a working group that developed Wi-Fi, and they called it the 802.11 working group. And then later on, they wanted to come up with a different version of it that could go faster. In other words, from 2 megabits per second up to 11 megabits per second. So they started a working group. This was the B working group. Actually, they started an A working group, but it turns out that the A working group didn't end until after the B working group ended. So we had these out of order here chronologically. But these are different working groups that developed newer technologies, but these are the main ones that made big differences or made a jump in our technology and our Wi-Fi technology that required new devices. There are some that fill in the gaps. There is a C and a D and an E and an F and so on, but those are other minor technologies that were not major changes in our Wi-Fi. In other words, you didn't have to buy a new Wi-Fi router for C or D or E or F. But lately, we've been changing them up a little bit. We've now begun numbering these things. We call them Wi-Fi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And one problem with this, in my opinion, is that it's easy to get it mixed up with the cell phone terminology. In other words, 3G, 4G, 5G, and so on. They are not the same thing, but so be it. They've decided to start numbering them to make them easier for people to understand. All right, let's go through these very quickly. And first of all, I want to take note here that the technologies I've listed here, these are the technologies that allowed the changes, allowed the faster speeds and so on. These are not a complete list of the technologies for each one. They're a list of the technologies that you are now familiar with because we've already looked at them up here. There are a few others, such as channel bonding and complementary code keying and so on, that we didn't cover in this course, so I did not include those in this list. So the first 802.11, the legacy one, only went 2 megabits per second. So slow it wasn't even really worth trying. And it used FHSS and 2.4 gigahertz. Remember that the lower the speed, the farther it'll travel, but the less information you can cram into the same period of time. Then the B working group came out. We called that Wi-Fi 1, 11 megabits per second. That was one because that was really the first commercially viable one at 11 megabits per second. It used DSSS and 2.4 gigahertz. A came out after that at 54 megabits per second. Quite a jump there. And it was using OFDM and 5 gigahertz. And those are the main reasons we got these higher numbers. Now with G actually was pretty cool. It managed to keep 54 megabits per second, but at 2.4 gigahertz. And it used OFDM and DSSS. Actually, the DSSS was for backward compatibility. It managed to do it with 2.4, which was cool because it now got the higher range that 2.4 gets as far as distance, but still got the 54 megabits per second. N was all the rage when it came out, and it went 450. That's a big jump, up to 450 megabits per second. It used MIMO for the first time, the multi-in, multi-out, and it also used the QAM encoding for the first time. It actually used both of these frequencies, and you could switch back and forth. AC was next, and most of us are on AC today. 1.3 gigabits per second. I should mention that these are all theoretical speeds. You don't actually get these speeds. They are under perfect theoretical conditions that you should be able to get them if you do it mathematically. Nobody actually gets those speeds. But it uses MUMIMO and 256 QAM and 5 gigahertz. The next one is AX, and we don't really have a lot of AX systems out there. I think that they are out on the shelves, but supposedly up to 9.6 gigabits per second using these technologies, the OFDM, MUMIMO, 1024 QAM, and all three of these frequencies. This was the first time. We got 6 gigahertz in the picture, by the way. The next one, I believe, and I cannot remember the letters for it, but Wi-Fi 7 is going to be a lower theoretical speed, but shorter distances and more stable. In other words, it will be a highly reliable system, and it's designed for commercial uses that need high reliability in their communications. That's what I remember anyway from my head, so take that with a grain of salt. All right, next we're going to cover something called the WPA2 four-way handshake, and I should have made that a title. So we're going to cover the WPA2 four-way handshake next.